Good morning. My name is Jian Bland, and I'm the Director of Youth Services at New Brunswick Tomorrow. And I am joined by.
Shan Byrd. I am an educator, a healer, and an activist. I'm a member of New Brunswick Education Association.
So lovely to have Shan here today. We're going to be talking a little bit about Black History Month and Black history, especially as it relates to the intersection of education. So, I guess to start off the conversation, I want to talk a little bit about this Education Justice Coalition that we're building, Shan, you and I together, and a little bit
Yeah,
about, some of the goals and objectives and, real work that there is to do and that we hope to do through this coalition.
yeah,
It's going to bring parents and students and educators together and really to mitigate and eventually dismantle some of the systemic inequities that affect our students and our community.
yeah. I really like this coalition because it's um, coming from a grassroots perspective, from the community up, and
Yes,
not necessarily the educational system down.
yes,
So it gives voice to families, parents, students, and educators. So, and when I
absolutely.
say educators, I mean all of us, crossing guards, security officers, paraprofessionals, teachers, all of us that make education move and happen.
I love that you say that, Sean, because I've always felt that there was a bit of a difference between school and education, right? Like school is school, but education can happen everywhere. It happens in living rooms, it happens in cafeterias, it happens on walks home from school, So to be able to have this hub where folks from the community can come and not only voice their concerns, but also problem solve together, sort of put their heads together around what we can do and rally as a community feels really fruitful. I'm excited about a lot of the momentum I think we can capture.
Yeah, and it adds to understanding that you have power in your
Yes.
community,
Yeah.
and that when you exercise that power, it gives you a certain amount of freedom and liberty. So yeah,
Yes.
this is
What a
going to be
good
good
point.
stuff.
Yeah, yeah. And I love that you say that because I think that especially now, there's such an emphasis on the school system because of COVID and the pandemic and remote learning, and now students being back in-person learning this year. I think that more people are thinking about education now than they may have, 3 or 4 years ago. And so I think it's really just an interesting time for the industry and for the space of education as a whole to really rework itself.
Yeah,
And in that reworking, one of the things I'm really excited about is that parental engagement perspective and that agency that I think a lot of parents maybe didn't feel before, but do feel now. And in conjunction with that, the students, maybe some of the agency they didn't feel before, but are feeling now. So I think that adds a layer of complexity, but also a layer of
yeah,
real insight to the work.
yeah. I look forward to seeing more student voices and parental voices. Education shouldn't be something that happens to you. It should be something that you are a part of, and you're creating it,
Yes.
right? So it's not just the educational system creating these opportunities for you. It's your hands in. You have a part. You have a stake in it all, a
Yes.
real genuine stake. So I'm
Yeah.
looking forward to the work that will emerge from this Educational Justice Coalition.
Absolutely. Me too. Me too. I think the coalition, from the different kinds of community activities we can do to the workshops that we can introduce, specifically as it relates to some of the things that are really relevant right now, right? Some of these um, anti-racist and bias, implicit bias trainings and workshops. I think those are really important, because to not acknowledge sort of the background of our students and the experiences of them is to not see them as whole people.
That's
And
right.
so
Yeah.
being, African American, being Latino, identifying as black or white or anything in the middle, I think it's really important to acknowledge because it's going to color the experience of our students, so to give them the tools to be able to navigate this world in their
Yeah.
own skin, I think
Yes.
is one of the best ways to equip them to go out into the world.
Absolutely. And understanding that it's okay to be in their own skin.
Yes.
right? That their
Yes.
skin isn't this bad thing, which culture, society would tell us.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. And with that, I wanted to mention the Juneteenth event that we did last year. It was so
Oh,
much fun, so
yeah.
much fun, especially because Juneteenth was made a national holiday just last year. So to have, a an event the way that we did, our virtual event that gathered, so many different people from the community, and we had
Yeah.
a DJ and we had Zumba. In addition
Yes.
to our panels, it was a blast.
It was. It was good stuff. Um, since last year, I've been doing a lot more research on Juneteenth, and it was brought to my attention while we celebrate Juneteenth as the official end of slavery in 1865. I learned that here in New Jersey, that slavery didn't officially end until 1866.
Wow. I did not know
So,
that.
yeah, so it's like,
Wow.
so where's the real Juneteenth? Right here, where
Right
we are,
here, where
in
we
this
are.
space. Hmm.
Incredible.
So,
Incredible. And it really
yeah,
speaks to how much we don't know about Black history, right? How much is still sort of being uncovered each and every day, each and every year. I think of things like um, the Oklahoma and Tulsa massacre, that happened
yeah,
in the early 1900s, and how much, many students, many adults don't know about those kinds of events that color and shape
yeah.
Black history. The period of Reconstruction, how little that is typically touched upon in our education system, and just how much nuance really plays a role in understanding the way that our systems and our governing structures have come to be, and some of the reasons behind the racially disparate outcomes that we see.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Absolutely. And it's knowing the truth and acknowledging the truth. Then we can begin to heal.
Yes.
But if
Yes.
we just keep brushing it under the rug and
Mhm.
acting like these things didn't happen, we got a whole generations of people walking around in ignorance, black
Yes.
or white, or
Yes.
anything in between.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that really, to touch on a point that we touched on before, that really is that difference between education and school,
Yeah.
right? Where we have to educate our students, and we're hoping that it happens earlier and earlier in school. But even if not, just being an American, being a citizen of this nation, it's incumbent upon us to really understand the history of our own nation so that we can do better for the next generation and so that the next generation can do even better than we did. And
That's
so I
right.
think it's incumbent upon us. The truth, will set you free.
Yes.
We can move
Yeah.
past it once we acknowledge it.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think in terms of education, teaching the truth, first you have to know the truth to be able to teach it.
Mm.
As you and I are discussing the history that we're discovering on our own, and that's just because we want to know.
Mm-hmm.
Not everybody has that desire to learn more.
Yeah,
So, how do you teach if you don't know? And it really starts with
it
the
does.
adults having an understanding of the true history.
Absolutely. And to that point, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't mention sort of the conflict that a lot of our education systems state to state are in right now. We're blessed enough to live in a state that has an Amistad curriculum, and maybe you want
Yeah.
to talk a little bit about what that is before we go into sort of the way that some of the other states are handling the teaching of Black history.
Yeah. So, in 2002, legislation was put into place, the Amistad Act, which states that African history, African American will also include there, is to be taught every grade level, every subject. It is to be infused in the curriculum. This is what, 2022,
20
20
years
years
later.
later, and there's no um, real application of that law, that act. Um, NJEA decided this past year that they wanted to do something about that. They wanted to create curriculum that is easily accessible to educators throughout the state. And it's a 5-year plan because we're talking of thousands of years of history.
Mhm.
You know, African history or Black history just doesn't go back to 1619. We're
Very different.
talking thousands and thousands of years.
Yes.
So, and dare I say millions if we acknowledge that the first human being discovered was Black.
Such a good point, and I think it's really a point that goes under appreciated that when we start Black history with enslaved people, what
Mhm.
message are we sending to our Black students? You know,
Yeah,
that's where their history begins. When we know, of course, that that is not. You know, you have so much Black history that predates and precedes the enslavement of African peoples, and I think it's really important to include that. You know, in the full scope of who Black people are and have been, and what that history really looks like. You know, I can't tell you how many students I run into who I mentioned someone like Mansa Musa, right, from the Kingdom of
mhm,
Mali, and
mhm,
they're totally unaware of who he
yeah,
was, and that Timbuktu was actually the intellectual capital of the world. It
yeah,
was, you know, a shining beacon of academia. And yet,
yeah,
you know, when we start history with enslavement,
right.
it really gives our students somewhat of a deficit mindset. So I love the fact that New Jersey is taking this and making sure that it is operationalized and really implemented in a intentional way in the
Mhm.
classrooms.
Yeah, and just to your point, you know, what does it do to your self-confidence, your identity, knowing that your ancestors go thousands and thousands of years and did great things?
Yes.
To
Yes.
go beyond, you know, the only thing that I hear most often is paragraph on Harriet Tubman. Maybe you might hear a little bit about Frederick Douglass, probably not
Perhaps.
though. Yeah, you know, and then everybody knows Martin Luther King. I
Yes.
was going to say Malcolm X, but that's not allowed.
You might
Um,
get a sprinkling of Rosa Parks in there,
and just a
right?
little bit of Rosa Parks, and that's all. That's it to your ancestry.
Yeah.
While they were all great people, there are so many more, and
Oh
we
my
can go
goodness.
back thousands of years.
Absolutely.
That
Absolutely.
yeah, that boosts your self-esteem and your knowledge of where you came from.
So true. It's so true. I think of even people in the 20th century, like Madam C.J. Walker, right, the first Black woman millionaire. Um,
Uh-huh.
and I think of people like Ethel Payne, who they called the first
Yes.
lady of the Black press. You know, and so
Mm,
for our students who are
yeah,
interested in things like entrepreneurship, journalism, social media, right? One of the
that's right.
original gurus of social media, one of the reasons that we know and have so much documentation about the civil rights movement and about
Mm,
Martin Luther King because of people like
right.
Ethel Payne, you know, and yet
Absolutely.
we never hear about her. We
Yeah.
rarely, if ever, hear about her, you know? So I
Yeah.
think taking that nuanced approach to Black history where we're talking about people who are in three dimensions, right? Not just the staples that everyone tends to go by. I think it really
Yes.
adds a different layering and dynamic for both our Black students, but our white students and other students as well, our Latino students, our Asian students, our
Yeah.
students who are biracial or multiracial. Black history is American history, you know, and so
Absolutely.
it's incumbent upon all different races, religions, and creeds to understand that, you know, just like any other racial group within the United States that has contributed to American history.
That's right. Yeah. It makes you uh, well known, well, a knowledgeable person. You know, you have deeper appreciation and understanding of other cultures when you're
Yes.
able to study history, period.
Yes. Period.
Yeah. And not
Absolutely.
just, you know, Eurocentric history, history.
History.
Yeah.
History. Exactly. And you know, speaking of history, I think again we'd be remiss if we didn't mention sort of what's happening around the nation at this point in time. I was just on the Brookings Institute website this morning and saw that at least 9 states had planned to ban certain books in their curricula, and that there was a lot of talk and conversation about this notion of critical race theory. And of
Mm,
course, critical race theory, for the audience who may not know what it is it's a academic political body of work from the 1970s that really takes a look at the way that the US systems, policies, regulations, and procedures have led
Yeah.
to intentionally racially disparate outcomes. Now, this was typically taught in law school, so it's not
Yes.
something that has ever really reached K-12.
Hmm.
But I think that there's been a significant first misunderstanding of what critical race theory is, and
Yeah.
second, backlash for what
Hmm.
critical race theory is. And so we have almost an overly strong response to the teaching of history that's
Yeah.
being mischaracterized and mislabeled as critical race theory. And while there's nothing wrong with critical race theory, I think it's important to note that that is typically taught once a person would reach law school or graduate school. Definitely not something that has ever really been mainstream K-12.
Absolutely. And when I think of it, because Kimberly Crenshaw, she coined the term.
Hmm. Hmm.
She states that she was, it's a news to her that is being taught in K through 12,
Right.
that this was specifically designed for law students. However,
Exactly.
we understand there's just an attempt to shift the narrative,
Hmm.
right, and to take the focus off.
Hmm.
Because as Kimberly Crenshaw said, she said, how do you how do you really justify what Chauvin did to George Floyd?
Right.
Now we shift the narrative
Mhm.
and change it, change what's being said,
Right. Hmm.
and get everyone thinking over here when the real issue is here.
Right. Right.
And so, listen, what happened to African people throughout the diaspora in America, chattel slavery was horrific,
Hmm.
horrific. It
Hmm.
was barbaric,
Hmm.
and it needs to be faced
Hmm.
at the end of the day. We
Absolutely.
cannot continue ignoring that history.
Absolutely.
So, for the racial reckoning that happened a few years ago for certain school districts to say, hey, listen, we need to teach things differently, to come in and try to shift the narrative, and try to change it and make it this bad thing to protect the ignorance is just wrong. It's
Absolutely.
just wrong.
It's just wrong.
Chattel slavery
Mhm.
was serious, was 236 years.
Yes.
It needs to be taught.
It needs to be taught. It
What?
needs to be taught. And I think
Yeah.
one of the real points of distinction that I find when I read a lot of what, certain parents are railing against is there's never been an approach through critical race theory or the teaching of Black history that seeks to make white students or white people feel bad about what happened and responsible for what happened in the past. That's not the idea, right? So the idea is not
Yeah,
to leave students, white students or Black students, feeling shame or
that's
guilt
right.
over it. The objective is to educate, because when you
Yeah.
don't educate, you repeat the mistakes of the past. And so it's not to say, hey, this person or this group is inherently
Mhm.
racist, or this person or this group is inherently victims. It's to say that these laws and regulations and systems and policies have been designed in such a way that they lead to intentionally racially disparate outcomes. And the work to do for our generation and the generations to come and the generations in the past is to
That's right.
undo that, to really
Yeah.
create an equitable, inclusive, and diverse country, because
Mhm.
diversity is our strength. I mean, we're in the United States of America.
Yeah.
Diversity is our strength,
Yeah.
inclusivity is our strength, and equity is our strength. And so it's more about teaching and understanding of why these outcomes exist so that we can unravel them, undo them,
Yeah.
and really create an equal opportunity for all
Yeah.
students, all people who live in this nation.
Yeah, I agree. And I truly believe that we cannot dismantle racism until we face it. Because at the end of the day, this system was created, right, when people decided to, one, come to a country, come to this nation, and to slaughter the indigenous people here, and then to go to Africa to steal, to um, murder, bring human beings here who were not thought of as humans, who were
Absolutely.
considered to be consumable labor.
Hmm. Three
And
fifths.
were, yeah, three-fifths of a man, right? Not even fully human.
Hmm.
And bring these people here to work them and work them to build this country. And then once someone got a conscience and decided, you know what, this isn't going to work anymore.
Hmm.
It's a lot more complicated than that.
Of
But
course.
uh, and then to quote unquote free uh, entire group of people, but yet never really abandoned, or never even, not even really, never abandoned that system
Hmm.
of oppression, never abandon it. So
Further
that's
entrench
why,
it. Further
yeah,
entrench that system.
right. So, you got Jim Crow and you've got the KKK,
Mhm.
and it just keeps evolving and changing. You got the 13th Amendment, that little loophole, right?
Yes.
And so today, there's no surprise why what happened to George Floyd happened.
Hmm.
Heck, there's no surprise why what happened to the young man in Bridgewater happened just a
Right.
couple of weeks ago, or even a week ago. It's
Even
no
a week ago.
surprise
Even the
because the
Ahmaud
mentality,
Arbery case,
yeah,
right?
even
Like,
the mentality hasn't changed. So until we face the facts and really look through this history and heal, because it not just affects Black people or brown people, it affects white people too,
everybody.
right? I mean, when you in your mind can separate yourself from another human being in their suffering, there's something wrong.
Absolutely.
There's
Absolutely.
something wrong. And no
We should
matter who
share.
that human being is,
Yes.
right?
We should share
It
a
doesn't,
common
I mean,
humanity.
yeah,
Absolutely.
any human being. Children
Absolutely.
at the border being caged in, that's a human life.
Yes.
Disability, a person with disabilities being oppressed, human life, no matter
Yes.
who you are.
Yes. We are only as humane as the people who we treat the worst. That's
Mm,
the real measure of our humanity. And I think it's
yeah,
so important to, just to your point, to understand the ways that these systems of oppression have evolved, right? And
yeah.
so while our students know broadly about slavery, do they understand the Jim Crow era? Do they understand what it meant separate but equal in the schooling
Hmm.
system? I mean, Brown versus the Board of Education was decided in the 50s. My parents went to segregated schools. This is not by any means as far away as sometimes the history books frame it to be.
Yes,
And so when we think about
yes.
each one of these systems, the system of policing, the system of criminal justice, the
Hmm.
system of medicine, and why and how Black women are 3 to 4 times, if not
Hmm.
higher, more likely to die in childbirth than their
That's
white
right.
female counterparts, irrespective of socioeconomic status.
Mm.
Irrespective of socioeconomic status. Matter of fact, Tammy Murphy, our first lady, has an
Mhm.
initiative designed around just that because, as progressive as New Jersey is, it suffers from some of the worst outcomes between Black and white mothers and Black and white infants as it relates to maternal and infant mortality. And so
Mm.
we see that there's work to do. And the
Yeah,
framing of this narrative, not just as slavery was 400 years ago, it was bad, it's over now, but to really track how these systems of oppression have evolved and the way that it's impacted all of us. All of
yeah,
us. We're all safer when marginalized communities and historically disenfranchised communities get their say,
that's
get
right.
that enfranchisement back. And so I
Mhm.
think it's really important for our students, but also for our parents and our communities to understand why teaching this and removing that layer of ignorance, as you said, is so important and is fundamentally enriching the way that they
Yeah,
understand and navigate the world.
absolutely. Good stuff.
Good stuff. Good stuff. So I'm so happy that we were able to have this conversation, Sean. I could talk to you
Yeah.
for days,
Oh,
literally, for hours.
we can go in.
We can go in. And I'm so excited for, the
Yeah.
work that the Education Justice Coalition is going to be doing. And of course,
Yeah.
for, this year's Juneteenth event, which, we've started planning and we'll be continuing to plan. So much to look forward to and so much for the community to stay tuned for.
Yes. Stay tuned. There's so much more to come.
Yes. So thank you again so much and
Thank
happy
you.
Black History Month.
Yay. Black history every day.
Every day.